the theme of Purim is really happiness. And therefore, today, with your permission, I really want to explore this idea of happiness. What does it mean to be happy? I know it's one of the most lucrative dreams and aspirations of every person in this world, but how do you achieve happiness? And what does it mean that the Jews were happy and were joyful after this miracle? So I'm going to share my screen with the reference sheets that we have. I know that Janet emailed them to you. You may have received them also. I'm share my screen just so that we can all follow here together and explore this theme together and what Judaism has to say about happiness. So here is this verse that we were speaking about. Does anyone want to read? I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself if you do, because I can't always see, especially when the screen is shared, I can't always see your hands that are up. So does anyone want to read? Here, let's begin with this verse that again speaks of the theme of Purim as mentioned in the story of the Megillah towards the very end. Right. And after the miracle, the Jews were filled with light, happiness, joy, and glory. And for the Jews, there was light and happiness, joy, and glory. Or in Hebrew, now, let's speak a little bit about happiness. What does that mean? If that is the theme of Purim, let's try and understand it. So we all know that one of the great ambitions of this country, as stated in the Declaration of Independence, is that we ought to recognize that all men are created equal, right? That's the quote right here, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, what does that mean? That we ought to pursue happiness. How do you pursue happiness? In a way, it reminds me of the great anecdote about Rabbi Allouche, who once came out of his home and he saw this man that he knew running in a certain direction. And Rabbi Allouche stopped him and said, hey, where are you running to? And the guy says, well, I'm running to make a living. And he says to him, well, maybe you're running to make a living in this direction, but maybe your living is in the opposite direction. Maybe you're not paying attention to where you're running to. And in a way, sometimes we pursue happiness thinking that this will make us happy or that will make us happy. But really, we're running in the wrong direction. Maybe happiness is in the opposite direction. And the question, of course, that Judaism asks, in order for us to achieve happiness, is, well, in which direction should we be running to? Where is happiness? And maybe we shouldn't pursue happiness. Maybe we should wait for happiness to come to us. Or maybe there are things that create happiness. Instead of us pursuing happiness, maybe if we do those things, then happiness will then automatically come to us. Maybe the pursuit of happiness itself thwarts happiness from happening. Because if I always think that happiness is somewhere outside of me, and I'm in this ongoing race to chase that thing that's outside of me, maybe I'll never achieve it, and therefore will never achieve that happiness that I may think exists. Maybe we ought to again be running in a different direction. So what does this mean, the pursuit of happiness? What does Judaism have to say about happiness altogether? I will dare quote here Deuteronomy that speaks of God, speaks certainly of the blessing of happiness too. And it says as follows. Does anyone want to read here? Deuteronomy 30, 11, 14. Anyone? All you have to do is unmute yourself.
Julie, go.
Okay.
Go ahead, Julie. Thank you so much.
It is not in heaven that you should say, who among us can go up to heaven and bring it to us so that we can hear it and observe it. Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who among us can cross to the other side of the sea and bring it to us that we may hear it and observe it. But it is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, to observe it.
Right. So that's the first of the three ideas that I want to share with you today. But the first idea is that happiness is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, to observe it. No, happiness is not something outside of us. Happiness does not depend on how much money we'll make, or what type of concert we'll go to, or what type of indulgence I will immerse myself in. But rather, it depends on whether I'll be able to look inward and find happiness within. Find my divine soul and actualize it. And once I can actualize my divine soul, then that will bring me happiness. And this is the simple meaning really of this verse, that it's not in heaven, and it's not beyond the sea. It's not again outside of us. If you really wish to achieve happiness, then you have to go to your heart, your mouth, your heart, but mainly inward, in order for you to find what your purpose is. And by then discovering that soul, discovering its purpose and actualizing it, then you'll find happiness. It's interesting to note that, you know, more and more books speak about, there are more and more books these days about happiness, which by the way is reflective, of course, of the lack of happiness in our society. Because if we are writing about it nonstop, it means there's a void. So, you know, there's a lack of happiness, and more books are written about happiness, from Dennis Prager's Happiness is a Serious Problem, until there's a Harvard book about happiness. I forget the name, but it was written by an Israeli professor. But
Tal
make, sorry?
Tal Shachar. Tal Ben Shachar.
Yeah, Tal Ben Shachar. But what's the name of the book?
It's also called Happiness, I think.
Yeah, something with happiness. But the point is that of that book and of Prager's book and so many books is that we should stop looking for happiness from without, but rather start looking within to find that happiness, which is, by the way, again, what Judaism has been teaching us now for 3,000 years. Now, in a way, this message is conveyed in the Jerusalem Talmud, because it's interesting to note that the Talmud makes a statement that if you think about it for just a little bit, you'll see that it was an impossible feat to achieve what is described in the statement. Let's read the statement. Before the temple was destroyed, Julie, you want to read a little bit more?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Before the temple was destroyed, young women from the city of Lod to the west of Jerusalem would knead their dough. They would then go to the holy temple in Jerusalem to pray via tunnels which led them from their home to the temple. They would return home to Lod even before the dough had a chance to rise. A scribe from the city of Migdal in the north would prepare the candles each Friday. He would then ascend to the temple, pray, and return home in time to light the candles before the Shabbat had arrived.
Right. Okay. Now, if you think about this, and if you've ever visited Israel, or even if you just know a little bit of Israel's geography, you know that it is impossible for young women to go from the city of Lod to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem on the same day. Now, this was before, right? Before cars, before any type of electrical transportation. People used donkeys and camels back then. So to go from Jerusalem to Lod, or from Lod to Jerusalem and back on the same day, was almost impossible. It was certainly impossible for a scribe from the city of Migdal who would do the same thing, ascend to the temple, pray, and return home just before Shabbat had arrived. The city of Migdal is in the north of Israel, and it's impossible to make that journey back and forth on the same day. So what is the Jerusalem Talmud saying here? Is it making up a story? Did they have wings that they could fly with? What is this describing? And according to Rabbi, there are many commentaries that expound on this, but Rabbi Allouche, one of the great commentaries of the Jerusalem Talmud, of the Bible also in general, Rabbi Allouche was the chief rabbi of Prague some 500 years ago. He speaks about how these underground tunnels refer to mystical tunnels. They weren't real tunnels. It's not that they went physically to Jerusalem from Migdal or from Lod, back and forth each and every Friday. Mystically, spiritually speaking, they went to Jerusalem. They didn't travel. Indeed, traveling physically to Jerusalem from the city of Lod back and forth in those days was impossible. So what does it mean? Again, that these underground tunnels refer to mystical tunnels. And the question that is being asked is, how far is the distance between you and the epicenter of holiness and happiness? Let's continue to read. Julie, just this paragraph, and then I want to develop this idea a little bit.
Okay.
These tunnels.
These underground tunnels refer to mystical tunnels, and the question that is being asked is, how far is the distance between you and the epicenter of holiness and happiness? These tunnels refer to the tunnels of our soul. Our core may be covered up, but if we travel through our inner tunnel, we will realize that we can be in the holy of holiness in a few moments. For if I am detached from my core, I may be doing all of these above things on a physical level, but I will remain detached from my own core of holiness. or I may enter into my tunnel, into my unscathed, unshattered, soulful essence, and down in that space, the road to Jerusalem is immediate and clear.
Right. I think the message is so powerful. So what this is saying is that when the temple was erect in Jerusalem, when holiness was felt in every area of Israel, then people could travel much more easily to their own personal Jerusalem. They could go and explore their core without any reservation, without any hindrance. Once the Jerusalem temple was destroyed, or more importantly, once this temple was somehow affected, then the road for us to reach that temple became much more difficult. Then it became almost impossible for us to then reach our soul, which is again a very deep mystical idea. But what this is saying is not just that happiness is within, and happiness can be found within and not without. But what this is saying is that if a person lives a soulful life, if his Jerusalem temple within is well and alive and is erect and is functioning, then he'll be able to access that soul easily and therefore find happiness also very easily. If a person's soul is encaged, is in prison, is suffocated, and that Jerusalem temple within is a little bit destroyed, therefore, then it will be very hard for a person to access that soul and then exercise happiness. This is really what Rabbi Allouche is saying, which is, I think, one of the great ideas about happiness, and I think about life in general. The more soulful we are, the happier we'll be. The less soulful we are, the less happy we'll be. The more we're able to unleash our deeper self, the more we'll be able also to live not just a meaningful life, but also a happy life. And I think I find that, it's fascinating to me, but as a rabbi, I'm of course exposed to many, many people, and I've reached the same conclusion time and time again. That is that the three things that in our society might tell you bring you happiness, from my personal experience, and I'm sure you'll all agree, or maybe not, and I'd love to hear if you disagree, but from my personal exposure to those three things that I'll mention what they are soon, they don't bring you happiness. One thing is wealth, money. I can't tell you how many times people have told me, well, I thought money would bring me happiness, and obviously it doesn't. Bill Smith, alav shalom, a blessed memory, who was the visionary of this great building here at CBT, came to us for the first time on Rosh Hashanah when he was 61 years old. And shortly after, he asked to speak with me. I had a meeting with him, and during my first meeting with him, he tells me, look, I'm a big builder from Chicago. I've built millions of, built many buildings. I've made millions of dollars. And I thought this would bring me happiness, but it didn't. So the only place I have left to explore is God. Will you help me? And I'll never forget that conversation. So wealth certainly doesn't bring you happiness. Maybe it makes life a little more comfortable, more easy, but it doesn't bring you happiness in and of itself. The other thing that people think bring you happiness is maybe connected to wealth, but that's comfort. If I'm comfortable, I'll be happy. If I can find that perfect, comfortable house, if I can find a comfortable car, if I can find that comfortable position, job, if I can find, then that will bring me happiness. And again, comfort, unfortunately, doesn't bring you happiness. In fact, sometimes when you come out of your comfort zone and you do something good and you actualize your soul, as we're speaking about here, that's when you'll be happy. Sometimes comfort is an antidote to happiness. So that's number two. And number three, something I can somewhat agree with, but it still doesn't bring you the essence of happiness, and that's good health. Yes, if you don't have good health, then it impedes on your ability to exercise your soul, and therefore on your ability to be happy. But I think good health is a means to happiness, not happiness in of itself. Because I know many people that have good health, and yet they're still not happy. So good health can certainly help towards achieving happiness, but it's not happiness in and of itself. So those three things that society feeds us with, that if you achieve those, you'll have happiness, really don't bring us happiness, and you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that. And I think this is exactly why, again, the Jerusalem Talmud is emphasizing that, the Torah is emphasizing that, Judaism in general emphasizes that if you wish to bring happiness, key number one is search within. Go to your soul, live a soulful life, do what your soul wants. What does the soul want to do? Do good, pray, help others, bring out your purpose, live for something, not just for yourself, for a higher purpose. If you live a soulful life, then you'll be happy. I will tell you this, what is astounding to me is that children know this secret or this key to happiness much more than adults. Why? Maybe because they're more in tune with their soul. They're less materialistic, they're less physical, they're less, of course, immersed with the troubles of life, and therefore they can be much more in tune with their soul, and therefore, again, be much more happy. But speaking of children, I want to share with you, Jerry, an anecdote that I may have shared with you, but it stayed with me, and I believe it will stay with me for the rest of my life. But a few weeks ago, I went to visit a dear friend who's a member of CBT. Many of you may know him, David Romanelli. David Romanelli has a 4-year-old daughter. His name is Cooper, and she unfortunately has cancer. Bezrat Hashem should help her with and bless her with a full and speedy recovery. And she's on a good trajectory, so hopefully she'll recover very, very quickly and fully. But I was visiting her at their home, of course with social distance and everything outside. And I'm speaking to this just wonderful, beautiful, and very soulful 4-year-old girl. And I asked her, tell me, Cooper, do you speak to God from time to time? And she tells me, yes, all the time. And I said to her, wow, that's nice. And does he speak to you from time to time? And she says, yes, God speaks to me all the time. So I said to her, can you share with me maybe what God shared with you recently? And she said to me so beautifully, without skipping a beat, again, it's a 4-year-old girl who's losing her hair and just so hard to watch her, but she's so beautiful and so soulful. So I said, again, can you share with me what God told you recently? And she said, yes, God told me that he loves my heart. And I thought it was one of those beautiful things I heard. And then I thought about the sentence. And I said, not only does this reflect the soulful being that she is, but also it reflects the idea that God does love our heart. But not often are we in tune with that. God loves our heart even when we grow up. He doesn't just love the hearts of children. He loves our hearts all the time. But sometimes we get so immersed with life that we forget it. And we forget that God loves our heart, then we stop loving our hearts too. We stop loving ourselves and we become less and we do less. And then of course we want to achieve happiness. But the first and foremost prerequisite, therefore, of achieving happiness is to go back to that childhood mentality and to that ability to listen to God and to listen to him saying to us that he loves us and that he loves our heart. Because the more, again, soulful we'll be, the more we'll be able to listen to that love from within, that divine love from within, the happier we will be. And this is a 4-year-old girl who, again, is suffering terribly right now, but she has a smile on her face. She's the happiest she could be in spite of her challenges, again, because she knows maybe what she cannot articulate, yet she knows so deeply, and that is that happiness comes from within. And the more soulful you are, the happier you will be. I want to go back to the story of Samuel, in which he tells us that he was called by God 3 times, and each time he thought it was a voice from without, but eventually understood that it was a voice from within. And when he was able to adhere or heed to that call, then he became a prophet. It's something I know that we've studied in the past, but it's a special passage from the prophets that tell us that sometimes God calls us from within, just like he calls Cooper from within, that 4-year-old girl. And when we're able to listen to him and say, you know what, yes, I'm not going to ask just what I want from life. I'm going to ask what God wants from my life too. Maybe he needs something of me. Maybe he wants me to partner with him and do good in this world. When I can ask that question and listen to the God within, then I can start being happy. And that's really key number 1. And maybe this is why the code of Jewish law that seeks to guide a person to living a life that is meaningful and purposeful has as its first law this following sentence: I have set the Lord before me constantly. Now listen to this. That means that one should not be ashamed because of people who mock him. I know very often one of the great obstacles to living a life that is soulful is saying, well, most people are materialistic around me. Most people are not being so soulful around me. So I'm going to be ashamed to be soulful. And therefore, the Code of Jewish Law, as Law 1 in chapter 1, tells us, don't be ashamed. So people will mock you. So what? Don't be ashamed. Because if you are ashamed, then you'll surrender to what is not you. And if you surrender to what is not you and your soul, then you'll never be happy. So rather be happy than be mocked. And that's fine. People may mock you, but at least you'll be happy. And that's really Code of Jewish Law 1:1, again, to set the tone for life. Because we understand in Judaism, again, that key one is that happiness has to come from within and from the fulfillment of our soul and its purpose. Key two, and I'm happy to listen to any comments, disagreements, etc., that you may have, and then we can move on to key number 2. But does anyone have anything to share? Anything? No. Okay. You can unmute yourself. You might be trying to speak, and I can't see everyone here at the same time. So no one. All right. Fine. Okay. So key number 2. Key number 2, I think, to happiness is not just searching what is within, the soul that is within, and fulfilling it, but I think the more we give, the happier we are. And what I mean by giving, of course, is giving good things, giving to benefit people, to benefit society, benefit the world around us. Now, before we go to the references, I want to mention what is so true, and that is that in Judaism, there are 2 words for happiness. We may have spoken about this, but one word is osher, another one is simcha. Now, if we go back to the Megillah reading, right, where it says that the Jewish people, there we go, for the Jews, there was light and happiness. So, LaYehudim hayta ora v'simcha. The word year is simcha, the second word. What's the difference between osher and simcha, even though they both mean happiness? Osher is happiness that we feel. Simcha is happiness that we do. The goal in Judaism is simcha, not osher, not happiness that we feel. Feelings of happiness depend very often from outside circumstances. If I went to a good concert, I feel happy, but it doesn't mean that that happiness will stay. It doesn't mean that it's real happiness. But if I do good, if I give, then it's simcha. Then I've created happiness, and therefore I become happy. Now, that depends entirely on me, not on anything from the outside, not on any good concerts or any good news or whatever it may be. Now, in a way, that's the happiness we should strive for. Sometimes we say to ourselves, okay, I've lived a soulful life. Or today, I am trying to access my soul through those tunnels that we spoke about. And I think, yes, I've figured out more or less what my soul wants, but I'm still not finding happiness. Very often the answer to that then will be, then start doing good. Go give something to someone that needs it. Go help a person. And it's astounding, but each time you help someone, right, I'm sure you'll all agree with that, there's a great happiness is created from that, right? Now, why? Because it triggers the soul within, the soul that wants to do good. And when the soul is happy, then our beings are happy. And giving is one of the greatest triggers for the soul. Doing good is one of the greatest triggers for the soul. And therefore, again, key number 2 is giving. The more we simcha, the more we do happiness, we do good, the happier we will be. We learn this also from many resources, but from an interesting resource here about the 4 species that we shake on Purim. Purim. Purim is coming up tomorrow, something in Purim. But the 4 species, and I was just testing to see who's up here and who's not. But the 4 species we shake on Sukkot. Now, out of the 4 species, 2 of them are clearly mentioned in the Torah. 2 are alluded to in the Torah, but they're not clearly mentioned by name. One of these species is Hadass, which we know to be is a myrtle beach. But really the way the Torah mentions Hadass, a myrtle beach, is that we should take for us a branch of the plaited tree. It doesn't say myrtle branch of the plaited tree. So the Talmud asks, 1 second, the myrtle is not the only branch from a plaited tree. There are 2 types of bushes that match the description of the branch of the plaited tree. One of them is the oleander, and the other is the myrtle. So why do we take a myrtle? Until today, we take a myrtle. Why not the oleander? The oleander fits the description of the Torah. It's also a branch of the plaited tree. But the Talmud answers so beautifully. Why? The great Talmudic sage Abaye answers that it is impossible for the oleander to be one of the 4 species, even though, again, it is a branch of the plaited tree, because its leaves are sharp and prickly, and the Torah's ways are pleasant and peaceful. As it says, the way are the ways of pleasantness, and all of the paths are peaceful. What does this mean? That we cannot take an oleander, even though it might be a branch of the plaited tree, because it's prickly. And being prickly is opposite the ways of the Torah. The ways of the Torah should encourage us to be pleasant, to be peaceful, or in the words of the ethics of our fathers, to rodef shalom, to even pursue peace. And if I am prickly and sharp like the leaves of an oleander, then I'm not doing what God wants me to do. If not doing what God wants me to do, then obviously I won't be happy. So what this is really saying is that the more I'm pleasant, the more my paths are peaceful, like the Torah's, the more I will smell good, and the more, therefore, I'll be happy. The myrtle has a delicious smell, but because it's so pleasant, because the paths are peaceful, because it's not like the oleander. So the more you do good, the more you increase the smell within, so to speak, the more your odor is a pleasant one, and therefore, the more you'll be happy. You know, there's a great French story, but it's a story I may have shared again. It was one of my favorite stories growing up as a young child. You know, your parents will tell you stories from the current culture. So I was born in France and lived there until the age of 8, as many of you know. So obviously until the age of 8, we read French stories. And one of the stories was about a little bird that wherever it went, it stunk for him. It smelled terrible. And he traversed mountains and oceans, and he couldn't find a good smell, and he was blaming everybody and anybody. This person stinks. That place stinks. Can't find happiness. It stinks wherever I go. And after 5 years of traveling the world trying to find a place with good smell, he realized that he had a rotten piece of apple right here beneath his nose. And he took it out, and he lived happily ever after. That's the story, but I think the story is a very powerful message. Very often we travel the world and we traverse oceans and mountains too, trying to find happiness. And we go to this seminar and we do that activity and we try to find, read that book or whatever it may be and say, okay, we'll find happiness. But we don't realize that sometimes it's just because we are not being pleasant. We are not doing good. And there's rotten pieces of apple all around stuck to us. And all we need to do sometimes is maybe just stop being prickly. Stop having a rotten piece of apple. You know those chronic complainers? I'm sure you know some of them, right, in your own life. If you're Jewish, I believe you know a few. I know quite a few also. Not in our community, of course, outside of a community, but I know a few. And I'm saying to myself, gosh, do they have that many rotten pieces of apple that they can never find a good odor? Because very often bitterness comes from within. And here again, the Torah teaches us so beautifully. If you want to be a hadass, a myrtle, if you want to be happy and have good smell and live in a good odor, surrounded and infused by good smells, then be pleasant. Have paths that are peaceful and stop being prickly and sharp like the oleander. Then you'll be happy. So do good and spread happiness and get rid of those rotten pieces of apple, and then you'll be happy. Now, I believe that this is why on Purim, and I think it's just so brilliant, on Purim again, which carries, as mentioned, the theme of happiness. That's why we're learning about happiness today, since Purim falls tomorrow evening and on Friday. But on Purim, we are told that there are 4 mitzvahs to this beautiful festival. One is reading the Megillah, also known as the Book of Esther. Second is sending Mishloach Manot, gift basket. Number 3, the Seudah, having a festive meal with our friends and family, and even strangers, anyone and everyone. And then Matanot Le'Evonim, giving to the poor. Now think about this. Why these mitzvahs? Now, obviously, some of them or all of them are connected to the story of Purim, but there's a deeper reason. Maybe the reason is to tell us that if we want to achieve happiness, as is the theme of the day, then we ought to engage in activities that bring that pleasant odor to others. What are those activities? Read the Megillah. Share a good story with others. Megillah reading has to be done for others, for myself, but for others too. Send food baskets. Again, spread goodness to others. Have a festive meal. Invite people to your home. Feed them. Rejoice with them. Give money to the poor, again, another activity that spreads good, that does good to the world. And those are the 4 mitzvahs of Purim, particularly maybe to give us that guide of how to be happy, because we really believe that more than happiness is from within, happiness is also created by giving. And if we can give in these 4 ways, as we are commanded to do during this festival of Purim, then we'll be able to achieve the theme of Purim, and that is happiness. So that, I think, is the genius behind these 4 mitzvahs of Purim, so that we can achieve that verse of La Yehudim Hayta Orah v'Simcha, that Jews had light and happiness on this special festive day. Anyway, so that's second idea. Happiness is from within. The more soulful we are, the happier we'll be. And of course, the more giving we are, the more myrtle-like we are. And with the ambition, the aspiration to spread good smell around us, and of course, and to eradicate any rotten piece of apple that we may have within, the happier we'll be too. That's idea number 2. Idea number 3, I don't know why there's number 4, because it's number 3 right here. We're speaking about 3 keys of happiness here. But idea number 3 is that happiness sometimes comes from us being able to embrace, not run away, not fight, but embrace the challenges or the cracks of life, knowing that there's wholeness even in cracks. Now, I think there's a beautiful Jewish law and custom, that is to say the Shema twice a day. Julie, you want to continue? Anyone else? Code of Jewish law, 1 morning prayers. Let's read about the Shema being said twice a day.
I'll read.
Please, go ahead, Janet. Go ahead.
The prayer of the Shema Yisrael is to be recited twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening. When dawn breaks and the sun emerges to embrace us with its warmth, we state, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." When night falls and darkness pervades our lives, we once again declare, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." God is one means the same God who was present during the day is also present during the night.
Right. Okay. What does this mean? Why are we saying the Shema twice a day? During the day, it's or twice every day, right? 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. It's easy to say the Shema and to declare our faith in God in the morning when the sun is shining. How about when it's dark at night? It's much harder. When challenges are there, it's much harder to bask in this light of God. But we say the Shema also at night to declare that we believe that God is even in the night. That is, blessings are also there. And therefore, dare we not escape the darkness, but embrace it and dig into it until we actually find it. That's why King David, and this was, by the way, Rabbi Stein's favorite psalm. In the book of Psalms, there are 150 chapters. His favorite psalm was Psalm 139. But in the book of Psalms, in that chapter 139, it says, "If I ascend to the heavens, there you are," referring to God. "And if I make my bed in the grave, you are there. If I take up the wings of dawn, if I dwell at the end of the west, there too, your hand will lead me." There's that belief that God is in the challenges of life, even in the grave, even when it's dark at night, even at the end of the west, God's hand is always there. And in a way, I think that one of the greatest ideas of life altogether is that challenges, they say that often, that what doesn't break you makes you stronger. And it's true. But I would dare suggest that it's that attempt to break you that makes you stronger. What that means is that you become strong specifically through the challenges of life. When you are challenged with something in life, you discover strength within that you may not even have known that you had. Maybe they lie dormant this whole time. But because you're facing a challenge, you have to excavate them. You have to somehow dig and dig and dig and say, well, where am I going to find the strength to deal with this? And then you find it. And that makes you not only stronger, but in a way, it also reveals this blessing that you had within that you never knew you had. I think that's why historically some of the great performers and composers, including Beethoven, which is the next example here, really created their best music when it was the toughest time for them. when they were deaf. Beethoven was deaf for the last years of his life, and that's when he created the Ninth Symphony, to the point that Schiller, called Frederick Schiller, called the Ninth Symphony an ode to joy. The story of joy itself, right? That joy itself comes sometimes from deafness. Reminds me of a Stradivarius, that most expensive violin in the world. How was it made? It was made by the broken gondolas of Venice. That broken wood is what creates the most expensive violin that then produces the sweetest sounds of life. It's specifically, again, the challenges that make us grow the most, and therefore can also lead us to the highest levels of happiness. So the third key to happiness is understanding that God is within those cracks. He's there even when it's dark, even when it's night. And his blessing is awaiting for us if we're strong enough, if we're courageous enough to dig and dig and dig until we find it. I spoke about a 4-year-old girl who's suffering from cancer, but this week on Sunday, I had a phone call with just a wonderful soul by the name of Josh Herland, a good friend who has gone through treatment after treatment after treatment for cancer that he's suffering, and he's right now in Israel trying an experimental drug. God should also send him a full and speedy recovery. But I'm speaking to him, and the theme of my conversation that he presented was gratitude. And at one point I said to him, Josh, how can you be so grateful? Look, you're in so much pain, and you're telling me about your ongoing fight with this terrible disease that so far is not producing too many fruits. You grateful? Gratitude is the theme of our conversation. And he tells me yes. And it was so moving to me. I said to him, why? And he said, that's because the more I realize what I don't have, the more I realize what I do have. And what he meant to say is that when I don't have health, then I realize the little bit of health that I do have, and then I'm grateful for that. When I realize that, I realize the true blessings that I have in life. I realize that I have an incredible family that's supporting me. May have not realized that before cancer, but now that this thing has hit me so hard, I'm realizing it's opened my eyes to the great blessings that I do have in life. Sometimes people have nothing, but they realize that really they are blessed with everything. And sometimes people have everything, but they become so numb that they really have nothing. And sometimes it's those challenges again, they shake us to the core, open our eyes up, make us realize that God is there, that there are great blessings within those challenges. And if we're able to become in tune with them, then we're also able to become more and more soulful, and therefore more and more happy. I just want to conclude with Ellie Wiesel, one of the great Holocaust survivors, passed away, I think, in 2016, July of 2016, if I'm not mistaken. But he became famous because of his book, Night, which, by the way, was written in the 1950s. In the book Night, he tells of his own Holocaust experience. But apparently no one wanted to publish his book. And he went from publishing house to publishing house to publishing house. No one wanted to publish it. And finally, I think it was the 10th publishing house who said to him, you know what, Ellie Wiesel, we'll publish just 3,000 copies and we'll see how they sell. And they sold very quickly. And very soon they published 10,000 copies and so on. And that tiny little publishing house became wealthy thanks to him. So it was his persistence and his faith in himself that really enabled him, and in his purpose, by the way, in his soul's calling, that enabled him to publish his story and eventually really make such a deep impact on our world. Night, by the way, is one of Oprah Winfrey's books. She had him over one of her episodes, and they even went to Auschwitz together, where he took her through his own path of suffering. But Ellie Wiesel tells the story of how in Auschwitz, where he was, there was a group of Jews that got together very secretly to decide what to do on Passover. They were used to, on that first Passover in Auschwitz, of course, they were used to having Passover with the Seder and matzah, their home, the songs. But now they were in Auschwitz and they still wanted to do Passover. He tells the story of how he too was part of that group. And they had decided to bake matzahs secretly They found a tiny little oven that they could bake matzahs in. And they decided also to have save some of their potato peels that they would receive every day to be able to have karpas. They also decided that the tears would flow anyhow every day, so they would be able to dip that potato peel into the salt water of their tears to fulfill that mitzvah. And they would get together a certain hour after, of course, curfew, so that they could secretly be able to celebrate that Passover. Anyway, he tells about that Passover. They all got together. They had no food to eat, barely any matzah. They had those tears from that salt water from their tears with the peels of potatoes that they had saved. And all they had was songs and themselves. Yet he writes that this was the most joyous Passover he has ever had in his life. Now, thank God, Ellie Wiesel lived until 2016, and he had many, many other Passovers. But this was the most joyous Passover he had in his life. And I asked him why. And he says, because this was a Passover in which my soul, attached with the soul of all the others, came alive. We had nothing. All we had was our soul. And we were so soulful on that night that that soul created the greatest joy. In a way, it's a tough picture or even scene to imagine. But I think what Ellie Wiesel was trying to share with the world is that instead of escaping from our challenges, we ought to embrace them, because they are the ones who really sometimes create the greatest source of happiness. They are certainly the ones that make us stronger. Now they're the ones also that enable us to become in tune with that idea that God is found also within darkness, not just within light. That his blessings are there even when I'm in the grave, not just when I ascend to the heavens. That's what life is about. And when we're able to become in tune with that, then that in of itself creates happiness, even when we are surrounded with challenges. I think that, to conclude, I think that is one of the great lessons of the coronavirus, that a lot of things have been stripped away from us, but many of us, thank God, have had the courage to go within and to find God even within that night of the coronavirus. And I think in a way it's created many blessings, many, many blessings, including, renewed bonding with family members, or deeper bonding with family members, and the ability to recognize again that God is there in all situations, even when it's harsh, even when it's dark. Now, again, that again stems from key number 3, which is this idea that happiness can be found even within the cracks of life. So just to summarize very, very quickly, we spoke about 3 keys to happiness. Key number 1 is knowing that happiness comes from within, not from without. The more soulful we are, the happier we'll be. Key number 2 is knowing that giving, doing good, creates happiness, not just for our surroundings, but for ourselves. And the more myrtle-like we'll be, to use that example, the more we'll be able to spread good smells and therefore be happy ourselves. And idea number 3 is that instead of escaping from our challenges, we should embrace them, knowing that God is found in them and his blessings are awaiting us if we are courageous enough to uncover them.